back. I hope you all enjoyed dinner. Was it okay? Let me hear you if it was. One of the great tragedies of the age that we live in these days is that kids aren't taught civics or history. For example, very few kids know that when God created the United States, He only created 49 states. And He looked over all the 49 states and He says, well, this is pretty good, but Texas and Arizona are too hot. Minnesota and Michigan and Alaska are too cold. Missouri and Illinois and Indiana are too flat. The people out east are too rude. The people out west are too fruity. So God created a 50th state that was just perfect. It had perfect weather, it had perfect countryside, it had perfect people. And He put it in the middle of the country so that everybody could enjoy it. But then He decided to move it just a little north so that the people from Chicago couldn't keep going to it and ruin it. And He called that state Wisconsin. You all might recognize this. Are there Bears fans here? No, there we go. All right, I've done it. Those of us who are lucky enough to be born in Wisconsin are very proud of that. The rest of you are just unlucky. If you're, Buddhists, you can hope to have a second chance at getting born in Wisconsin. So some amazing things have happened in Wisconsin recently over the last 2 years, and our speaker is going to be able to tell us just what happened. Scott Walker and Rebecca Kleefisch ran in 2010 for governor and lieutenant governor in Wisconsin on a platform that said they would balance the budget without raising taxes. And they got elected, and they proceeded to do exactly that. They got behind something called Act 10, which not only balanced the budget, but also initiated changes in collective bargaining in the state. These were tremendously controversial. In fact, Act 10 and what the Republicans did up in Wisconsin triggered what I think can only be called a union riot in the state capitol. Some of you have had a chance perhaps to be there. Diane and I visited 4 months ago, 6 months ago, and it was just amazing. The union thugs and protesters were still all over the state capitol. Little kids were going in to see the Christmas tree that was set up in the state capitol, and you couldn't hear yourself think. These guys were in the balcony banging drums and chanting. They had banners hanging down. They were filling the hallways with their yelling and shouting. It was just a zoo. So this union riot in Madison resulted in a campaign to recall the governor and the lieutenant governor and some of the senators who helped pass Act 10. And just a month ago, was it less than a month ago? What was the date of the recall? June 6th? Yeah, June 5th? June 5th, thank you. Yeah, on June 5th, Governor Walker and Rebecca Kleefisch won their election, which was a tremendous victory, I think, for taxpayers. Now, we had hoped, to have Governor Scott Walker here tonight. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, his wife, Tanette, had an appendicitis attack, had an appendectomy again, but she apparently is doing just fine. Our wishes go out to her and to her husband and to their 2 children, but apparently she's recovering just fine. The governor's office was kind enough to provide us with an alternative speaker, and that is Mike Huebsch, and I'm delighted to introduce him to you now. Mike Huebsch was at Governor Walker's side every moment during the last 2 years. He is the Secretary of the Department of Administration for the state of Wisconsin. I didn't know there was a Department of Administration, but he tells me that in effect he's the COO of the state. He has authority over all of the budgets. It's a cabinet level position. He's essentially side by side with the CEO, the governor, implementing what the governor wants to achieve. Secretary Huebsch was also for 2 years the Speaker of the House. He was a majority leader for 2 years. He was a state elected official for 16 years. For the last 2 years, he has been at ground zero in Wisconsin, right there in Madison, fighting the good fight for the taxpayers. And because Madison is at the forefront of the national fight for taxpayers, I think what he's experiencing and what he can report to us today is extraordinarily valuable and interesting. So please welcome Mike Huebsch.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Joe. Thank you so much for having us here, and let me first, on behalf of the governor, send his apologies. He truly wanted to be here. I will tell you that, first of all, there's a couple of Wisconsin legislators here as well. Senator Frank Lasay is here, Representative Dean Knutson, colleagues of ours, and I will tell you, there you go. They were as much on the front line as Governor Walker was as well, as far as trying to make the changes and the reforms. But I will tell you that the governor was very disappointed he couldn't be here, but it has been a remarkable week, and that's something in the Walker administration, to say that you had a remarkable week. But it started, of course, with the horrific and senseless murders of the individuals in Oak Creek, and the governor has certainly been taking a great role in that. Has visited with the families. As a matter of fact, was visiting with them again today. Will be at some of the funerals, and was at, in fact, a vigil on Tuesday when he had to cut it short because he had been told that his wife, our First Lady, Tonette Walker, had been taken to the clinic with stomach pains, which ultimately resulted about 36 hours ago in an emergency appendectomy, Joe. But she is home. I talked to the governor as I was coming into Chicago, and she's home, resting comfortably. I told him they of course have all our prayers, but I will tell you, and this is something that the governor mentioned the evening of the victory speech, and I'm sure some of you in the audience here were watching him, but there are people all over the country who pray for him and his family, and he feels it every day. And I told him again that our prayers are with him, and he said, "Oh, I know. I hear him all over." And so we ask that those continue, of course, but I'm very pleased to announce that Mrs. Walker is home and resting comfortably, and of course the governor sends his greetings. I would also say that let me just, on behalf of myself, my colleagues from Wisconsin, and the other elected officials, and I know that there are a number of us in the room here. Well, I used to be an elected official. Let me thank Joe and those of you who support this organization. I was telling Joe earlier about how in Wisconsin, when Governor Doyle was on the forefront of the global warming movement in 2004, 2005, it was the Heartland Institute that we turned to in Wisconsin for true facts, for the one organization that truly was willing to stand up and basically say the emperor has no clothes. And we used the information here for time and again to combat that. I am certain that every elected official in the room has the same story on some issue. When they have had to deal with an issue back home, when they've talked to constituents, more often than not when they're talking to their local media, and an issue comes up that we're not completely fully versed in or don't have the research staff that we'd like, we often turn to the Heartland Institute to find out what it is that is going to be the issue. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of my colleagues that are in the elected office for those of you who support this group and for what you're doing to further conservative values in this state. So thank you so much. I would also say that obviously I'm very proud to serve with Governor Walker. He and I served in the legislature together for about 7 years. when I first got there, I will tell you that when you're a new legislator, there are always issues that come up and amendments that come up on the floor that you don't have a clue what they're talking about. Not a clue. I remember mine, I think, had something to do with the flashing light that we were going to put above the school buses. Should it be blue or should it be red? Something along those lines. And it's those types of issues, from the mundane to the highly important fiscal issues, that you're often, as a freshman, looking for guidance. You're looking for assistance. And I can tell you that when I was first elected in 1995, or in 1994, and came into office in 1995, it was Scott Walker who I looked to. Now, Scott was a little younger than I, but he had been there about 18 months before I got there. And the one thing that I noticed from Scott Walker was not only could he articulate what we were doing and why we were doing it, but he had done his homework. He was a policy wonk, which I think is a moniker he still appreciates. And we knew, and I knew, that if he was voting one way and I didn't have a clue how to vote, I could go with him and find out why I did it later. Now that sounds an awful lot, I understand, like we need to pass this bill to find out what's in it. I get that. But it's those early days in the legislature, and I think every legislator will have a little bit of that, if they're honest, to say that you look for individuals that you can count on. And it was Scott Walker for me. And that was something that has not changed, because his moral compass, his center, his conservative credentials are beyond reproach. He knows why he's doing something. And it's why, when we went through what we did over the last year and a half in Wisconsin, he never wavered, never once. We knew exactly what we were doing, and most importantly, why we were doing it. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those stories that, oddly enough, you didn't hear on CNN or MSNBC during that time. But I want to tell you some of the things that we did go through, just so you understand the battle that we faced, but why it's so important, not only in Wisconsin, but in states across the country. And ultimately, hopefully, if the sun, moon, and stars align, even in Illinois, we could see some changes that would correct these things. But being a proud Wisconsin boy also means that I have to be proud of some of the people that are true leaders of our country in Wisconsin right now. And obviously, Paul Ryan was mentioned earlier, a congressman who grew up just a few miles from Governor Walker. Tremendous leader in our nation. Many of you may be going to the Republican convention, where our RNC chairman, Reince Priebus, will be down there, another Wisconsin boy. I'm very pleased and proud of him. Of course, Governor Walker. We have opinion leaders from Wisconsin, Greta Van Susteren and Stephen Hayes from the Weekly Standard, and of course our favorite son, Joe Bast, from the Metroplex of Hortonville, if I remember correctly. But I have to be honest that if you're truly a proud Wisconsinite tonight and for the next few days, you really are thinking only of three people: Greg Jennings, Donald Driver, and Aaron Rodgers. And the 35 days before the Bears come to Lambeau. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. But as the governor often says, and Governor Walker's, whenever he speaks in Illinois, he's quick to say this. The one thing we can all agree upon is that the two teams that will be battling for the Central will be the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, because the Vikings are not in the running. And he said, what he likes to say is that what's the similarity between a car thief and the Minnesota Vikings? Neither of them have a title. So, yeah, I know. There's Viking fans out here, I understand, including the good guy who drove me down here tonight. Tom, I'm sorry to do that to you. But it was the governor's joke, as you know. But it is truly an honor to serve with the governor and to be here tonight to talk about what we have tried to accomplish. It was not, I will tell you now, as we stand here today, I would love to say that when he was first elected on November 2nd of 2010, and he contacted me just a week later and said, let's get together and try to build a budget, I would love to say that we had fully planned out everything that was going to happen over that period of time. We certainly did sit down and talk about the things that were going to be necessary, and most importantly, because I was serving in the legislature, and he'd been in Milwaukee County for a number of years as the county executive down there. I sat him down with our fiscal bureau to basically, explain to him what he'd gotten himself into as to what the Wisconsin budget looked like. And for years, and if you can picture this, many of you are business people, CEOs, individuals who have been in business or are familiar with it for some time. If you can picture a company and coming in as the CEO of a company that for better than a decade had spent hundreds of millions of dollars more than they were bringing in every year, was taking money from one part of the company to bolster up another one, depleting the resources over here, was delaying payments to creditors, was putting their employees on forced furlough to try and continue that business keeping afloat, you would know what Scott Walker was walking into when he was going to become governor. But that wasn't the full story. It was worse. Because not only had Wisconsin done all of those things, most especially under the Democrats in the East Wing, in our governor's office, but not only that, they had in fact taken $200 million out of a fund that our Supreme Court said was illegal and had to be paid back. And ultimately, we had a reciprocity payment due to the state of Minnesota that the previous administration simply said they just weren't going to pay. Now, I represented in the legislature for 16 years a district that borders Minnesota. I border the Mississippi River. So I'm very close to a number of people over in Minnesota. And when Governor Doyle simply announced we weren't going to be paying them the $60 million, my colleagues in Minnesota weren't amused. They didn't think that was the way business should be done. And Governor Walker came in. As a matter of fact, I'm going to share with you something tonight that nobody's seen yet. But it's going to be the letter that Governor Walker is going to send to each of the agency heads shortly. If it didn't go out today, it will be going out in the next few days. That's basically the budget instructions for our agencies. I want to read you just the first paragraph. When our administration took office on January 3rd, 2011, Wisconsin was suffering from a $3.6 billion budget deficit. Prior administrations had delayed payments, raided segregated funds, and used federal stimulus for ongoing operational expenses. For years, Wisconsin had relied on one-time fixes, accounting gimmicks, and tax increases to balance the budget. Those days are over. That's the way that Governor Walker is making it clear we're changing things. So it was clear that we had a challenge on our hands. We had to balance the budget, and I would love to be able to say, that as our critics and those people who have fought against the governor for so long would have you believe, or would Rachel Maddow would have you believe, or anybody else, that there was some great conspiracy here, that we were going to somehow break the unions, or that we were going to do some sort of conspiratorial act to try and take over all of state government. But the bottom line was none of that occurred. We simply sat down and looked at the state budget, looked at what had happened over the last 10 years, and realized we had no choice. Many other states need to realize that as well. We're standing in one of them, that we really didn't have a choice. We were facing a situation where we were going to be bankrupting the state, not necessarily for our generation, but certainly for the next one. The governor often starts his speech by saying, people ask me, first of all, why did I do what I did? And he said, the answer is simple. Matt and Alex, his two sons. And for me, it's why I was so supportive of what he was doing and why I believe so much in what we're trying to accomplish. He and I have two sons that are almost the same age. My boys, Ryan and Brett, his sons, Matt and Alex, he was not going to do to them what we were undoubtedly careening toward, and that was leave them a bankrupt state. And so we knew we had to make some fundamental changes, but not simply to balance a budget for one biennium, not simply to get through another couple of terms, but make fundamental changes that were going to make Wisconsin a strong state for years to come. Give them the opportunity to reform themselves, people the opportunity to grow and build. When Governor Walker was running for office, in 2010, he would often say that he was applying for a job. He was out talking to the voters who were going to be the employers, and he was applying for the job, and he had some basic brown bag principles. Number one, and this was the one that was most foreign to Madison, but number one was that we will only spend the amount of money that we have. Remarkable, isn't it? But that was exactly the number one thing that he said that we were going to do. The other thing, and the one that we are really trying to turn Wisconsin around in, is that government doesn't create jobs, people do. And to finish that, yeah, exactly. To finish that thought it's important to recognize that what Governor Walker recognizes is that with the actions and the practices that you do in government, you either create the environment by which jobs will be created or they won't, where they will stay or they will leave. We have, in Wisconsin, created the environment whereby jobs, if employers ever get the confidence that undoubtedly needs to be overcome for what's going on in our nation's capital, if they get the confidence that they will bring those jobs back. And in Wisconsin, we're already seeing that. There are some things that I can tell you that are going on in Wisconsin that we're very excited about. People are beginning to notice our changes already. With the reforms we have enacted, we already have saved Wisconsin taxpayers over $1 billion by providing the reforms and the opportunities to find savings within state government, by finding ways to reform it, and by asking employees to pay a little bit toward their own benefits. For the first time in 12 years, property taxes on a median valued home have gone down, and we turned a budget deficit, as I talked about, into a budget surplus. We have momentum, and we're going to continue to move that forward, and other people are noticing. After our first year in office, Wisconsin moved up 12 spots from 29th to 17th on CNBC's America's Top States for Businesses. It's the ranking, absolutely, one of the biggest jumps in their rankings. And most importantly, we moved from 41st in the country to 20th in Chief Executive Magazine's rankings, the biggest jump of any state in the nation. Those are the types of things that people are recognizing that there's something going on in Wisconsin. And it wasn't simply because we went through a recall and that the governor was the first individual to ever withstand a recall vote in the nation's history as far as a chief executive. It wasn't those things. It's because people realize that they finally have a governor who gets it. The one thing that business and jobs need from government is stability. What are we going to get? What are we going to have? And do you understand the impact of the decisions you make on the jobs we can create or not create? That's where Governor Walker has really turned the climate around in Wisconsin. And that's why we're so excited about the future that we're going to be looking at. Now, I talked a little bit about the challenges we went through, and as I mentioned Frank and Dean specifically because many of you saw the protests that occurred. And I will tell you that when we developed the legislation that ultimately turned out to be Act 10, which was in fact just really the reform of our collective bargaining. It wasn't the elimination, but it was the reform of collective bargaining. We knew that we were going to be in for a challenge. And we sat down and worked through some of the things that we were going to face, many of the things that we anticipated. We knew that there would be very possibly job action. We knew that there may be people who would walk out. We knew that there would be requirements that we would fill some of those positions, and went through a full analysis of how we were going to make sure that that was going to happen. But I will be honest to say, we didn't anticipate all of it. We had thought that the passage of the legislation would take about a week. We would introduce it on a Friday, and by the following Friday, it would probably be passed through the two Republican chambers that we had. The one thing we didn't anticipate was the incredible love that the Democratic Party has for Illinois, and our senators coming to spend a couple of weeks here. We didn't fully anticipate that, but we understood afterward why that had to happen. The union leaders who were directing their actions needed more time. The first protests that happened right after the introduction of the legislation were relatively small in comparison, a few thousand. It's interesting to call that relatively small, but that's where we were. And so we had a few people who came in. They needed to buy more time. And so as the senators left and basically ground the legislature to a halt in Wisconsin, then we had to realize that there were going to be challenges that we were going to face, not only from the legislative side, but also from the executive branch. One of the things that the Department of Administration Secretary oversees is the Capitol Police, the individuals who have the charge for protecting the Capitol, for making sure that there is decorum, that there is safety, that there is order in the Capitol. I don't know if you saw the TV, but we didn't exactly fulfill that task very well. There were times when obviously it was completely being overrun, and we knew that we were facing tremendous challenges as the union leaders were bringing in people not just from Wisconsin, but they were very proud to post their signs in the Capitol of the Los Angeles Electrical Worker Brotherhood, or the New Jersey group, or the Texas group, or wherever, where they were coming in from all over the country. It also meant that the legislators who were on the front lines were having to run a bit of a gauntlet, and you saw some of those on TV. But there were high notes and there were low times. I can say that one of the lowest times was in early March, when we were getting closer to the point where we felt that we were going to be able to get the Senate back, we were going to be able to get the legislation passed, and things were somewhat beginning to move. But we also knew that one of the ways that these crowds were being formed and really coming together, other than the first couple of weekends, because, well, frankly, the first couple of weekends, it was kind of a novelty. On the weekends, the individuals that would be bussed in from their communities, they'd march around the Capitol, then they'd be bussed home. They were paid for probably time and a half for being down there over the weekend, and boy, it was fun, you know. There were a couple of us, and I did it as well, in that first weekend, when I went in somewhat incognito, wore a baseball cap, jeans, t-shirt, well, not t-shirt because it was February, but I wanted to walk around and find out what was going on. And certainly you had those who were legitimately angry with what we were doing, legitimately believed that we were destroying the Union, and we had nothing but ill intent to what was going on, with really no recognition of the clear fiscal problems we had before us. There were some of those, there's no question. There were others who, as they would walk around with their sign, would talk about what they were going to do next week, or filling out their grocery list, or whatever, and that's part of it as well. And there were unquestionably, and any of you who have been to Madison certainly understand this, there were a number of those folks that you gotta love them, but the gray hair with the ponytail down to the middle of the back, who were reliving the 60s, and this was so wonderful for them. You know, this was so nice to be out protesting something again. And so we had some of that. And all of that was occurring, and in the beginning, that's kind of the way it was. But as we got closer and deeper into it, obviously it got much more challenging, and certainly much more militant in times. And the legislators from Wisconsin are here would certainly attest to some of the harassment that they faced. It wasn't from all of them, of course. There's bad apples in every group. But some of the challenges we had there, some of the low points, and one of the things I will tell you about, is that as the head of the Capitol Police, I can tell you that we had roughly 35 to 40 officers when we began that. Well, obviously 35 to 40 officers is not going to cover 100,000 people. And so we had a mutual aid agreement, or a mutual agreement with police forces from around the state who would come and they provided us officers to try and maintain some order and decorum. But obviously one of the biggest areas that we drew from was Dane County, which is where Madison sits, and then the Madison Police Department. And we were just a few weeks into it when we realized that some of the protesters were getting quite militant, and in fact, somewhat dangerous. And so there was the intent and the discussion about how we were going to then remove those individuals from the Capitol. And it was passed up the line to me that the sheriff in Dane County and the chief of police in Madison made it very clear to us that the minute that we laid hands on any one of the protesters to remove them from the Capitol, they were going to remove their troops. Their force was going to leave. That was nearly half of our entire force. So our hands were somewhat tied right from the beginning. That was undoubtedly a low point. We knew at that point that we weren't going to be able to control the situation, but simply manage it until something changed. And fortunately, something did change, in that I was sued by our former Democrat Attorney General for access to the Capitol. And at the result in the 3-day trial that came out of that was the judge ordered me to clear the Capitol. Oh no, I lost that one. Okay. Yes, Judge. And so we did. We were able to go in there, and at that point, the officers, of course, would recognize a judicial order over the orders of the police force, or the captains, or even the governor, and we were able to do that. But I can also tell you that during that time, there were times when one of the ways that these groups and the crowds would form was through social media, and we quickly learned that you had to follow Twitter or you had to follow Facebook to find when the next group was going to be coming in and kind of taking over the Capitol. And I remember one night in particular in early March, when there was a huge force that was coming up of people that were coming up State Street. And again, any of you who've been to Madison know that the Capitol is on a hill, and about 2.5 miles down State Street is the campus of University of Wisconsin-Madison, and you can see all the way down there. And that particular evening in early March, we saw a force of students coming up State Street, and we knew something was going to go bad. And we had had gotten to the point where our regular hours in the state capitol are we open in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, we close at 6 o'clock at night. And so we had closed the doors and we had officers posted at the doors, but there were some individuals, some protesters that were still in the Capitol. Well, through the use of that social media, they learned who was going to be where, and some of those protesters rushed, opened the doors, and starting to allow those groups to come in. I happened to be outside the Capitol at the time because I was talking with the police inside and telling them what was kind of going on. I was by no means the source of the information because we had a very good source of information from officers that were outside the Capitol, but I was informing them what was going on because the group was building, and I thought that we were about to lose control. And I talked to some of the officers inside, and they said, I think we've got the doors closed, I think we're in good shape. Until some of the ground floor windows from the legislators, the Democratic legislators, started to open up. And I happened to stand out one in particular. And as we watched, it was very much like sand going through an hourglass. The people were just funneling in. And I called the officers inside, and I said, I know you have the doors secure, but you're about to lose the wings because people are coming in. And they said, yes, we see them trickling in now. We're doing what we can. So I called a few minutes later because they were still coming in a few windows. And they informed me that they had lost control of the ground floor and had fallen back to the first floor of the Capitol. And they continued to funnel in. And I said, well, if you lost control of the ground floor, then all the doors are going to be open. They said, yeah, we realize that, Mr. Secretary. We really need to go now. Okay. And so it's fun to be able to laugh about this now. And so a few minutes later, they called back and said, we have lost control of the first floor and are falling back to the second floor. I knew that the third floor was where we had our internal command center. And I said, you can't give up the third floor. That's where the command center is. They said, we understand that, Mr. Secretary. We really need to go now. A long story short, we did not lose control of the third floor, but those are the types of things that we were dealing with all the time, and it was undoubtedly one of those particularly low points. There was also some fun high points. The State Assembly had been debating the bill for, oh boy, Dean, I don't know if you're still here, but what was the debate? 60 straight hours, I believe, if it was in the State Assembly. And ultimately, they were going through that, and they were having to run the gauntlet to get out. And in Wisconsin, we have a tunnel that goes from the state capitol over to a building, the Justice Center, right across the street. And it's one of the ways that the governor was able to come in without, running the gauntlet through. We are able to use that as a staging area for some of our officers. And this tunnel was an important area that we were using for egress and access to the Capitol. But after the Assembly had passed it, we had realized that we were going to have to get them out because the crowd was very large and very militant at the time and not happy with what had happened. And so we had planned that we were going to take them over through the tunnel to the Justice Center, and we were going to put them in basically SUVs or vans or whatever to get to their cars, which we had parked on the other side of the city. Well, the protesters were certainly going to understand that as well. And so while the exit from the tunnel, as far as the parking ramp is concerned, a secure parking ramp, is on the east side of the building, what we did was we put 3 very large buses on the north side of the building so that the protesters would presume that that's how we were going to get them out. And as we put them in the SUVs and they started going out and more of them got out, it wasn't until the last SUV left that the protesters finally realized those buses were empty and the legislators had already left. It's those types of things that, just some of those interesting things that the stories you don't get to hear when you're in the midst of it. But I will tell you that those stories are not necessarily to talk about the impact of the protest or to in any way demean what some people truly felt was the wrong direction to go. They felt this was a true attack on themselves. We understand that, and the one thing I can tell you is that the governor was cognizant of that and understood their First Amendment rights. We had no intention of stepping on any of those. But we knew, as I explained, that we had no choice. Wisconsin had to do what, as we look around the country, so many other states unquestionably need to do. We need to realize that we cannot leave a bankrupt country for our children. A fiscal conservative understands the basic simple idea that Governor Walker ran on, which is spend only the amount of money that you have. And that's what in Wisconsin we're doing. We are about to enter into a budget where for the first time in better than a decade, we are starting with a surplus. We have a small surplus. Yes. What that gives you the opportunity to do, and the legislators that are here, certainly in every state, recognize that more often than not, you can get through the budget that you're in, through some of the accounting gimmicks and games that I talked about. But what hole have you left for yourselves next time? What anchor have you put around your neck for next time? Governor Walker said, we are not going to do that anymore. We are not going to leave that anchor for ourselves and for future administrations, and certainly not for our children. And by simply recognizing what we needed to do in order to fiscally balance the budget, we were able to do so much more. The one thing that I think Act 10, and I've told the governor this, I think he undoubtedly agrees. The greatest legacy, I think, that will have come out of what we did in Wisconsin, simply for Wisconsin. I mean, hopefully we've been an influence in other states as well, but for Wisconsin, the legacy will be the opportunity that we have given to the people of the state to unleash that creative power at all levels of government, to unleash the opportunity for truly talented fiscal conservatives to step in and say, all right, I'm no longer locked into a contract. Some of the things that we had to deal with, some of the things that we were facing. The governor often talks about in the schools especially. We have 426 school districts in the state of Wisconsin. One of the biggest things that they were dealing with was that in 80% of the contracts, it was built into the contract that the health insurance that you provided for your entire school district must be provided by the teachers' union insurance company. 80% of the districts. Well, surprise, surprise, they were a pricey bunch. It wasn't cheap insurance. Yet we couldn't really break out of that. By simply removing that requirement, we have seen already creative minds in each one of the school districts figure out ways that they are finding savings for their taxpayers by providing essentially the same insurance that they were getting. We injected the free market into government. That's what needs to occur in this country. It's that legacy, I think, that we are going to see in Wisconsin for a generation. That we are going to see opportunities for true conservatives to step up and recognize that, yes, there is a role for government in this country. We recognize that. We know that combined, the people can truly be good government. But when government loses touch with the people it represents, when people who are in government no longer recognize the realities of what people are facing in their day-to-day lives, and when they see unemployment that is much too great, and when they see expenses that are going up by their taxes that are greater than in some instances what their mortgage is, I mean, that's when it gets crazy. When your property tax is greater than your mortgage payment, something is out of line. Something needs to change. And it's those things that we recognize in Wisconsin, you certainly recognize in this room, and certainly recognize in Illinois, that we are going to make some changes that are going to create a stronger country and a stronger state, and most importantly, a greater legacy and a greater opportunity for our children. It is through organizations like this one that individuals like Scott Walker and individuals like Paul Ryan gain the knowledge and the courage to make those decisions, to move our country forward, and to provide a greater country than was handed to us. Thank you again for all that you're doing, and thank you for having me here tonight.
Would you give the secretary one more round of applause, please? Very sorry the governor cannot be here, but what a great speech. Very inspirational. Now, how can we bring that fight to Illinois? I was sitting here enjoying that speech, getting very, very excited until I realized, wait a minute, we don't live in Wisconsin. This is Illinois. It's a long way to go. Tomorrow morning, we already put out a call. We hope to have Tom Cross on with us. And Tom is a guy who's, I think, leading the good fight on behalf of a lot of people here in Illinois. And I wish he could have been here tonight to hear that speech as well. Because eventually, we're going to have to pound the rock here as well. And information is power. And the good news is that eventually, and it takes a while to get there, but as we saw in Wisconsin, and maybe someday we'll see here, truth will win. Are you willing to help? Are you willing to help the Heartland Organization Institute? All right, before we have closing remarks from Joe, let's give away our raffle prize. And I'm told this is not an iPad 1 or even 2, it's an iPad 3, which is one better than a 2. So ladies, one will draw and one will hold the bag. And if we call your ticket, just make your way over to this side of the stage and you'll get the iPad 3. And the ticket goes, or the prize goes to the holder of ticket 330438. 330438. Congratulations. Please meet us over here. Also on behalf of WIND Radio, thank you, ladies. On behalf of WIND Radio and Jeff Reisman, we thank you for allowing us to be part of this event. Join us tomorrow morning beginning at 5. We'll talk a bit about what happened here tonight and how we can go forward in Illinois. And now would you please welcome one more time Joe with a few closing remarks. Joe Bass, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm going to keep this very brief. Thank you, Mike. That was a fantastic presentation. Really close-up, first-hand experience of what was going on in the state's capital. I'd ask you to please give a round of applause to Heartland staff who put this event together. Everyone at Heartland pitches in, and that's a lot of people helping out. I especially want to thank Nikki Comerford, who is our event planner. Nikki did just a tremendous job this time. Yep, she's over there. I'd like to thank John Howard and WIND for the promotional work that they did for this event. I think many people in this room are here because they heard about this event on WIND. So thanks a lot to those guys. Have you put your money in those envelopes yet? Somebody at each table should grab the envelopes and then pass them around to everybody else at your table. It's okay, we can wait. We'll just stay here until all the envelopes are filled with money. According to The Economist, on May 26th, the Heartland Institute is the world's most prominent think tank supporting skepticism toward man-made climate change. We're really proud of that label. But climate change is not the only thing that we do. We're also major players on trying to block the implementation of Obamacare and working on repeal and replacement of that. We are working with state legislators and governors all across the country on school choice. The Heartland Institute is a major advocate of the parent trigger, which is legislation that allows a majority of parents to circulate petitions, sign petitions, and then requiring that their school districts implement the reform that the parents demand. And we're leading the effort to oppose internet taxes. As many of you have heard now, governors and state legislators are looking forward to taxing every purchase on the internet as a way to fill their budget gaps. And it's an insidious, terrible thing, and we're on the front lines of trying to oppose that. All of this costs money, and at the beginning of this evening, I thanked all of the Heartland donors. I really hope that more of you in this room can become donors. If you're already a donor, please make another contribution. Giving even $50 or $100 gets you on our mailing list, and that means we can send you publications, we can send you to future events, so that you know what we're doing and you can come to more events like this. You can become part of the solution. This is a key period in America's history. We have an election coming up in November that could really mark the difference in the direction of this country for the next 4 years. Some really tough decisions are being made. Some politicians are willing to take really courageous stands, even in the face of militant opposition like our friends in Wisconsin. You should be helping them. Stand up, get behind them, give them the information that they need to be effective. Contributing to the Heartland Institute and think tanks like us is an important way to achieve that. And finally, if you give contributions to the Heartland Institute and other groups, you can tell your kids and your grandkids what you did in 2012. Okay, at an important moment in American history, you know, what did you do to defend freedom? Where were you? And you can say, you know what, I joined with other people, I supported organizations, I was part of the fight to preserve freedom for you and for your kids. So make a contribution, please. Enjoy the dessert buffet. Where is does anybody know? Somebody's way in the back. There we go. Just across the back wall, there's a fantastic dessert buffet. Please enjoy that. I think it's open for another hour. Enjoy it. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate it. Have a great evening.